Hello, my wonderful pre-calculus class. Welcome to our second online math adventure. We are still in 6.2, graphs of other trigonometric functions. Today, we will continue graphing our tangent function. The b, which tells us how many cycles in 2 pi radians, will be different from the number 1. We will graph one cycle of y equals 2 times tan of x divided by 2 using our 5 steps. Let's review our 5 steps. Solve the three-sided inequality, find the period, identify the increment, list the 5 critical numbers, and sketch one cycle of the function. When we are graphing a tangent function, remember this is our general formula right here with the a, b, c, d. And we always use this inequality with endpoints being negative pi over 2 and pi over 2 for our inequality. This is the inequality that we use for the tangent function only. And the period is pi divided by the absolute value of b. Here is our inequality again with our endpoints. And here's the general equation. Here's the equation that we're graphing. The a is 2, the b is a half, the c is 0, and the d is 0. This is the very same thing, and again, this d should be a 0. So here we're going to have our inequality. We're going to replace it with the b minus c. Dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 2 when we undo the dividing by 2. We're going to undo dividing by 2, which means we're going to multiply by 2. So when we do that, the 2's cancel out. We're left with negative pi. The 2's cancel out. We're left with x. The 2's cancel out. We're left with pi. And remember that this negative pi is the first critical number, and it's also going to be where we have our vertical asymptote. The pi is the 5th critical number, and that is where we will have our second consecutive vertical asymptote. That was step 1. Let's look at step 2, where we're going to find the period. The period tells us how many radians it takes to complete one cycle. So it's going to be pi divided by b. The b is a half. Dividing by half is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. So our period is going to be 2 pi. Then we're going to find the increment, which will help us to find the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th critical numbers. And the increment is always the period divided by 4. So it's 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi divided by 2. Our 4th step is where we're going to find our critical numbers. And remember that from our inequality, our first critical number was pi. Now pi is the same thing as negative 2 pi over 2, and I changed it to halves because our increment was in halves. So we take the first critical number, we add our increment, we get negative pi over 2. We take the second critical number, we add the increment, we get 0. We take 0, add our increment, we get pi over 2. We take the pi over 2 and add our increment, and we get 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Therefore, our 5 critical numbers will be negative pi divided by 2, 0, pi over 2, and pi. Now we are ready to graph one cycle of our tangent function here. And we're going to draw an XY axis. And we're going to put our critical numbers on our XY axis. So I'm going to start off with, here is a negative pi. Here is negative pi over 2, 0. This is negative pi over 2. And this is pi over 2 and pi. And remember now, where we start the cycle and where we end the cycle, that is where we're going to have our vertical asymptotes. Remember, 2 consecutive vertical asymptotes? That's why we're using that, inequality? So I am going to just sketch this. Now remember, the vertical asymptotes are not really a part of it, but for our purposes, we're putting it here so we'll make sure that our graph does not go beyond these vertical asymptotes. And then we're going to put our A, and our A is 2. So you go up 2, and we go down 2. And remember, since the A here, which is this A right here, it is greater than 0. So the graph of the tangent function is going to be increasing as we move from left to right. So we're going to use the second critical number and the A to get a point on the curve. And here is the middle critical number will always be on the axis. And then here we have the fourth critical number. Use the A to get a third point on our tangent curve. So then we're going to have a little portion that's half concave down, and the other part, another half, is sort of like it's concave up. And the curve will be getting closer and closer and closer to the vertical asymptotes, but never touching them, never crossing them. Never touching them, never crossing them. And you're going to have a home assignment that looks something like this, and you'll see that in Plus Portals when you go there. So we will do this together and have a great time with our online pre-calculus class. Bye for now.